Welcome back to Pictish Shorts, the Pictish Art Society's podcast with very short questions and very complicated answers. Now, our guest today for episode 7 is Kelly Kilpatrick. Now, Kelly is an archaeologist and an author who lectures widely and is often spotted on the TV. And our last guest was Murray Cook, who mentioned Kelly a few times with regard to the incredible stone and the work that's going on at Old Kilmadoc. I'm hoping we'll hear more of that shortly, but in the meantime, welcome Kelly. Can you tell us what you're working on at the moment?
Well, thank you very much, David. It's lovely to be here. And as usual, I've got quite a few Pictish projects going on at the moment. As you just mentioned, Old Kilmadoc. Wow, what a sight. I was brought into this project by Murray Cook, who was on your last show, podcast last week, back in 2022. To do research with them at Old Kilmadoc. And I had initially been called in to do this because I had been working on an inscribed stone that was pulled out of the burn that flows by the church there in the late 19th century. And I'd given a paper on that, and that way I was introduced to Murray Cook. And when we were doing a bit of work in the cemetery, because there'd been a cross slab discovered there a couple years before by the rescuers of Old Kilmadoc. So we had to do partial excavation to get a conservation quote. And when we were excavating this stone, there was sort of at the top of it was Ross Wood scraping away. In the middle was Sue Mackay. And then at the bottom of the stone was myself. And then Ross said, "There's carving up here." And I went and looked at it and I thought, "Oh my gosh, it's an Ogham inscription." And I lost all sense of professionalism and started doing a bit of a, excited victory dance and was running across the site screaming, "Murray, Murray, you won't believe this." And, so then it obviously was quite a big sensation that we'd had a cross slab with a Pictish era cross slab with an Ogham inscription on it. So we've been doing quite a bit of work on that. And so that's one project. We're still working on it. So that's one thing. Related to that, I've been doing work on Pictish shrines. Okay. So that's another exciting, I find it quite exciting.
Me too, believe me.
I am a little bit behind with this project, but I'm working on something on women in Pictland. So I'm working on writing a chapter in a larger work for women in Pictland. And I've got a few other things on Pictish place names in Aberdeenshire and things like that. So yeah, I'm always I'm always thinking about the pigs, but I'm not doing work or parenting. I'm always thinking about the pigs.
Yeah. Me too. I mean, it's a common affliction on people in this podcast, so don't worry about it. You're safe with us. So let's get right into it. Let's start with the first question. Now, this question is always of particular interest to me when the guest was very clearly not brought up in Scotland. So let me ask you, what first got you interested in the Picts?
I was going to say, the surname might be misleading, but you've probably noticed by the way that I speak, I do not have a Scottish accent. So I grew up in the US state of Alabama, and I had always been really, really interested in history. And I remember in school, we used to, when you're in school, you read lots of literature, and obviously it was American literature, and it was never very old, in terms of, how old things could be. I was always interested in, ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. And then when I was in my final year of high school, Beowulf was on the syllabus. And I read it. I was just obsessed with it. I thought, wow, this is the most wonderful thing ever. And then we had an assignment shortly following our reading of Beowulf, where we had to write a historical fiction short story. And I thought, I'm really interested in Scotland. Let me do something about the time of Beowulf. And I started writing a short story about a Pictish king. And I still need to finish that. But from that moment on, I was hooked. I absolutely loved it. And I remember spending some of my earliest paychecks on Wainwright's Problem of the Picts. And it was at about that time between going to school and university that I joined the Pictish Art Society. And I remember you had to fill out the application by post at that point. I even went through it. I found some of these things earlier, some of my really, really early Pictish Art Society field trips and journals. And I remember back in those days when the internet was a bit younger, you'd sort of correspond by post. And I remember getting sort of research paperwork and things sent to me from the Royal Commissions of Scotland and the Pictish Art Society. When I did my undergraduate degree, I had the good fortune to be given choices with what I wanted to write my dissertations on. So my first dissertation, this is probably going to sound really weird, but it was on the different methods of conserving Pictish symbol stones from weathering. And that was in the early 2000s. So that was my first one. And I remember I did a dissertation on Pictish women's clothing based on the evidence of the sculpture. And I did another very large one on the landscapes of Pictish symbol stones in the Don and Dee River Valley. So I had a great big map of Aberdeenshire on my wall. And then in 2005, the opportunity presented itself to immigrate to the UK for graduate school. And I did my master's dissertation on a Pictish topic, on a Pictish saint, which involved lots of inscriptions as well. So that's how I really got into inscriptions. And then for my doctorate, sadly, I wasn't allowed to do the Picts, but I did get a good overview of insular languages and literature. So all the language and literature of the Picts' neighbors. And that's really helped to sort of hone in my interest on the Picts, because it's always good to have comparable evidence. And yeah, that's kind of how I got interested in it, how I ended up here. And I just, I try to do things with the Picts, about the Picts whenever I can.
Brilliant. So you were the founder member of the Alabama Pictish Art Society.
I was probably the only member back in the late 90s, early 2000s. You never know. There might be more. I did my best.
I would think so.
People.
We've got, since we started doing lectures online, we've got a really big membership in the US and Canada, but particularly the US. It's great to see our membership's twice what it was when I joined the Pictish Art Society. So yeah, it's fabulous, but very different back then. So next question then is, what do you find most fascinating about the Picts now? It was Adrian Maldonado who described the Picts as having a moment at the moment with the amount of activity going on. So what do you find most fascinating about the Picts now?
The Picts now, they've always been fascinating, but one of the things that really strikes me now is the advances that are being made in archaeology relating to the Picts. Archaeology and languages. Those are two things that the Picts always seem to just kind of get not so much ignored, but the effort hadn't been put into these two things in the past. And we're now learning a lot more about their language through the study of it, but also through sources like place names. And so more places and more terms are appearing that are clearly Pictish than we knew about before. And as well, one thing I find really wonderful about the archaeology, and again, this is referencing a lot of the work of Professor Gordon Noble, is knowing where the Picts lived. That's, we can always sort of surmise where they probably lived by where the Pictish symbol stones are located. But I was really blown away when they did the LiDAR scans of the Tapo North Hill Fort, just to see how many house platforms were on that. And you kind of think, it just, and it's just, that's really sort of revolutionized how we view these societies. It's not necessarily just interspersed little farmsteads and just a few people here and there. These are really big settlements. And that poses lots of other interesting questions about how were they trading with other cultures? How were they incorporating things like writing? But yes, did these types of things affect, the development of the Picts and their art? And I'm also particularly interested, this is probably a bit of a selfish thing, but interested in inscriptions and things like that, as well as our understanding of early church sites. I think that's come a long way as well.
Great. So next question is, what is your favourite stone or artefact?
I know I'm not allowed to say all of them. This was a really challenging question. And at first I was thinking, I have a favorite class 1 Pictish symbol stone, have favorite class 2s, and that sort of refers to the different way in which they're carved. But I thought about one that just kind of struck me. It's the St. Mado's cross slab. That's always been quite proudly displayed in the Perth Museum. Just kind of feels like an old friend. Every time I'm in Perth, I always have to go and visit it. And I think that's why it's, one of my favorites. And what I particularly like about it is, in terms of Pictish art, I'm not going to say it's simple, because nothing about Pictish art is simple. but it's got much less carving and decoration on some of the sides than some of the Pictish Class 2 stones do. But I really like the fact that on the reverse, we have three men on horseback, and they're all slightly different. And then at the bottom, we have three Pictish symbols. So you think, oh, those probably relate to those individuals. But I love the fact that it's obscure, that the symbols aren't matched up to the people. And this was clearly something that was very obvious to the carvers. And if the symbols relate to the people in some way, this was very obvious to them, and it possibly never occurred to them that a time may come when we don't know what this means. I think, that really kind of encapsulates the constant search for discovery about the Picts. And I love the fact that the rider on the bottom is carrying a book satchel. Or he's got a satchel shown over his shoulder, and it's probably a book satchel, which is other evidence for literacy amongst the Picts. And the cross on the front of it's obviously very exquisite, very beautiful, and it's surrounded by these wonderful little potentially mythical beasts. And I quite love the way that you have these almost dog-like beasts that sort of cover the top of the cross slab, as it kind of arches over, and they sort of meet in the center. And I've always wanted to do a project where we focus on the tops of cross slabs, because these things are often decorated all over. But the top and these sort of decorations that go around the side, I often feel get kind of ignored. And for obvious reason, they're really tall, and most people are not going to be tall enough to see the top. So I've always kind of pictured, Kelly going around with the ladder, looking at the tops of these cross slabs. I suppose if I wanted to, modernize it, a drone might be a more sensible solution to this, where I could photograph them from the top. But yeah, that's one. I think St. Maddo's Cross Slab, that's definitely one of my all-time favourites.
The way it's been presented in the New Perth Museum with the lighting, with the colours, is absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, because it gives you an impression of how it may have looked originally, because that's obviously one of the senses that we've lost with these monuments, is that they will have been very colourful. And hopefully through new, developing technologies as well, we might be able to recover some of what that originally looked like.
Yes, and we all eagerly await Jordan Patrick's PhD on polychromy. And in the meantime, I'll keep splashing paint on some of mine to see how that works. So, next question, Kelly. If someone could only visit one site or museum, so you've got friends visiting, which one and why?
Again, you can't just say all of them.
No, you can't. And you can't say the NMS, because
everyone
the
said,
NMS is...
You know what? That was never my first thought.
Right.
That was, strangely enough, that was never my first. When I first thought about this, I was like, oh, if you're a hiker, the Pictish hill forts are really wonderful, like Dundurn Pictish hill fort, Dunotter, Taponoth, they're really wonderful. But if you really, really want to immerse yourself in Pictish artwork and kind of the imaginative world of the Picts, my favorite is Meagle. I love Meagle Museum. It's entirely devoted to Pictish sculpture. There's nothing to distract you from it. It is just a museum of wonderful Pictish sculpture from the site at Meagle, which was a royal residence in the 9th century and also an ecclesiastical site. And the sculpture at Meagle is absolutely fantastic. You don't have any of the earlier incised or class 1 Pictish monuments, but you do have a huge number, I think it was about nearly 30 in total, of these wonderful class 2 stones. And you've got different types as well. There's architectural pieces, there's cross slabs, there's what you call recumbent grave covers, or things that would have lain flat over a grave. And the artwork on them is absolutely fascinating. It's really wonderful. So yes, I'd say Meagle's my top choice.
I think it's a great choice. I mean, I'm an Angus lad, and it's although it's technically in Perthshire, it's on the Angus-Perthshire border, so we'll claim it along with St. Vincent's.
Cooper Angus ward. Yeah. So yeah.
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 But it is, and I think that at Meagle, you mentioned the architectural fragments. I think they're often overlooked, but I think they are a fascinating insight into, the first stone church buildings on these great sites. Always great to see. So the last question, which is the stinker, and that is which lost stone or fragment would you most like to find? Now, it can be a wee missing piece of something bigger. It could be a whole cross slab. What missing thing would you love us to come across?
Now, I know as someone who deals with lots of complicated Pictish inscriptions, That's probably the answer you're expecting, as well as someone, and obviously as someone who's doing a lot of work at Kilmadoc, I would love to find the rest of the cross slab with the Ogham inscription, as well as the rest of the inscribed shrine panel that's there. But that's not my choice, because you never know. We're working on that site. We might find them. It could happen. So I had a really good think about this. And you know what I always really, really, really wanted to see? So there are a few recumbent grave slabs that survive from Meagle and St. Vigen's. And at the tops of these, what's presumably at the head end of these recumbents, are these niches, really deep niches carved into these stones. And it clearly had a function, probably to hold something upright. But what? Do you know what I mean? Every time I see these, I just want to know what fitted into that slot. Was it a cross? Was it a stone cross? Was it a Pictish symbol stone? Because these recumbents don't have symbols on them. And that just, I lay awake wondering, what did that thing look like when it was new? And so, yes, if we could ever find a whole one of those, or a complete one, or one where it was obvious that the pieces fitted together, that we could reassemble, that would be a real dream come true. Because to my knowledge, that's a fairly unique type of monument style that we get in Pictland, but they're not intact.
Yeah.
So
I've never really thought about them all that much. It is a fascinating kind of monument, isn't it? I can picture the one at Meagle that's got the two Espis or seahorses, whatever you want, hippocamps you want to call them. And that one's plainly got something that was meant to stick in the end of it.
Yeah, something was meant to go there. And it's presumably another, something that's made out of stone that stood upright, because that's the socket to hold it. But what was it? Was it a cross? Was it carved on both sides? Did it have an inscription on it? Maybe the name of the individual? Did it have their symbols on it? What was it, Yeah. And I think for someone who deals a lot with the sculpture, I think paying close attention to little details like that is, I guess it's my job. Maybe it's something that, to be aware of, because sometimes there were other functions. Sometimes these stones had other things attached to them that we now don't have. So I know, for example, the cross slab at Woodray has this extension coming off the top, and it may have had a capstone, possibly, because this is something that you find in Irish sculpture of the period, where there would be a little capstone on top of a cross in the shape of a church or a reliquary. And it's always possible that the Picts may have had something similar with some of these monuments, and it just unfortunately hasn't survived. So that would be my Pictish wish.
It's a great shout. Similarly, I'm intrigued by the Cossins stone, with that missing section where something was perhaps inserted into the face of the stone. Again, if we could find what that was.
What was it? Was it like a little relic or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah. Was it not stone? Was it metal? Was it? Yeah. What was it? It's absolutely incredible. It's very, very deliberate. It's like the little corners missing off the bottom of so many stones, like the Maiden Stone. We think, is that for an offering? It's so deliberate. It's not being dictated by the piece of stone at all, because it's so common. What was the thinking there? Yeah. So many of these little things are missing.
And some of these, you think, was there, in addition to having paint, to being painted, did they have these other things as well, like a reliquary shaped box on top of them? Where people, like sometimes you might leave stones on certain types of tombstones, where things like that going on. Was that what these little niches were for? So it would be really interesting to kind of work out these puzzles. And I think that's what I like the most about the Picts, is there always seems to be an endless supply of puzzles.
Yeah, do you know, I have a theory. I think that either turns you off the Picts, or it completely fascinates you.
Yeah.
It's obvious which category you fall into, Kelly. Kelly, that's been absolutely fantastic. Thanks for taking the time. You're a busy person, a busy mum, and really appreciate you coming to join us. Hopefully, we'll see you talking at the Pictish Art Society again before too long.
Okay. Oh, thank you so much, David. It's been great to talk to you.
Thanks, Kelly. Bye bye.
Okay. Thank you.